Hi, and welcome to Macromolecules Carbohydrates lecture. Here are some examples of carbohydrates, ones that you'll probably be familiar with. Starches, sugars, fibers, grains, and this weird word roughage, which basically just means greens. Carbohydrates have lots of jobs. They are used by cells to both store and to release energy. Think, plants, which are many of the things that are on the example list, take in carbon dioxide and water, and through the process of photosynthesis, make that into sugars or carbohydrates. So plants literally build themselves out of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are really easy to identify because their three elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, are found in this amazing 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So when we start to see some pictures of carbohydrates later, you'll be able to count that for every 1 carbon, there will be 2 hydrogen, and for every 1 oxygen, there will be 2 hydrogen, giving it that again 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. There are 3 types of carbohydrates. If they are a single carbohydrate, they are called a monosaccharide. If there are 2 monosaccharides hooked together by dehydration synthesis, they are called a disaccharide. And if there are many monosaccharides, any more than 2 hooked together, it's called a polysaccharide. Obviously, those go from smallest to largest. Here are examples of monosaccharides. The most famous one up there is going to be glucose, and that's because, again, that's what plants are using to pull together to build themselves. It's what plants create during photosynthesis, so it's very, very important building block for them. Deoxyribose and ribose, that's the sugar in DNA and RNA. Fructose is a fruit-based sugar, and then galactose is going to end up being put together and used to make lactose. Here's a picture of a glucose molecule. Sometimes we call them 5-carbon sugars, and the reason that we do that is because there are literally 5 carbons, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And if you see that, I know that it says 6 up here, but that's because there's one other little carbon here. When we call it a 5-carbon sugar, it's because that's what makes up this structure portion of them. And carbohydrates really do sort of look like this on the chemical level. Now, when those monosaccharides that we just learned about on the previous slide hook up together, they're going to form more complex carbohydrates or disaccharides. Sucrose is glucose plus fructose. Lactose is glucose plus lactose. Maltose is glucose and glucose. Here are 2 particular monosaccharides that could hook up to form a disaccharide. Remember, if we go back a slide, look, right here we have glucose and fructose. When we hook them up together, we're going to provide a disaccharide. And hopefully you'll remember how to do that. And again, that's going to be through dehydration synthesis. Remember, we pull an OH off one side, and we pull an H off the other side. And then when these 2 things come together, they're going to form that disaccharide and a molecule of water. Another thing to notice is that different monosaccharides have the same formula. Notice how this one is C6H12O6, and so is this one. But if you notice, what's actually ends up being different about them is the placement of the actual elements themselves. You can see that this one is not identical to this one. Look, there's no little H sticking up off the top here. It's an OH sticking off the bottom. But again, if you counted them all, you would still have 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, but the shape of them is what gives them the slightly different feature, one being glucose and one being fructose. Then through dehydration synthesis, then they bind up into the disaccharide sucrose. Polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are when a lot of monosaccharides get together. At the bottom, you can see the polysaccharide cellulose. This is why cows have 5 stomachs. Look at all those bonds. When a cow eats a blade of grass and it has to break those glucose down, that's a lot of work and a lot of energy. And so if they don't have a lot of stomachs to be able to really begin to break the bonds and then finish breaking the bonds, it's very hard for them to get energy out to build their large bodies. Here are some pictures of polysaccharides. You can see that the shape of the potato versus the liver or the meat versus the cotton is very, very different. And so, again, the shape of each of these glucose molecules, they can all hook up differently, just like the carbon could hook up differently, and they can form all of these different shapes to form these very complex and unique polysaccharides. All right, here is the polysaccharide starch. Now, when we count the number of monosaccharides, we end up with there being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 monosaccharides. And then they're going to hook up in bonds, and remember that they're going to produce 1 water molecule for each bond. So when my monosaccharide hooks up with a second monosaccharide, that's going to produce the first piece of water. When this now disaccharide hooks up with a third monosaccharide to form a polysaccharide, that is my second water molecule being formed. Then when this polysaccharide hooks up to make a larger polysaccharide, there is a third molecule of water. And then when it hooks up to be its final largest polysaccharide, 4 molecules of water are formed. So if you notice the pattern, every time we add an additional monosaccharide, an additional piece of water is formed. But there will always be 1 less piece of water formed for each for the total number of monosaccharides. So 5 monosaccharides form 4 pieces of water. Again, there's your 5th monosaccharide, but only 4 pieces of total water end up being formed. This is the last slide. This is just the dehydration synthesis item gone over once again. Remember, when the H comes off, that H is positively charged. It's a positively charged ion. When the OH falls off, it is a negatively charged ion. Those 2 opposites attract to form water. And then this little bond here also has an opposite charge, so it bonds together to form the disaccharide. So again, H ion falls off, OH ion falls off, they form water, dehydration synthesis. Then when they go, when they leave also a polar relationship, and these 2 stick together. The exact opposite would happen if we were talking about digestion. So let's kind of erase this in reverse. If I have a disaccharide here, and we decide that we're going to put water back in, so we're going to add water. When we add water, this is called digestion, and water is a part of digestion, and so when this water molecule gets added, it breaks apart the disaccharide and makes it back into a monosaccharide. That is the process of hydrolysis. If you come back again, we're going to have a discussion of lipids for our next section.